Hi, I'm Mickelle Weber, founder and auteur of House of Peregrine. Expat, immigrant, pioneer, none of these were a fit, but Peregrine describes what we are all about perfectly. Those that craft their life story with intention. I've spent the last 6 years in awe of the life-changing connections and stories I have experienced while living abroad, and believe it is time for this adventure to be recognized, celebrated, and elevated to the life stage that it is. Through these interviews, I hope to connect those living internationally more deeply to both the place they are living and with themselves and those around them. We cover everything from international finances and meaning-making to global parenting and relationships to make your time abroad more intentional, edifying, and full of beauty. Find us at houseofperegrine.com, where you can find more ways to connect with the ethos of Peregrine. I hope you enjoy today's guest. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the House of Peregrine podcast. I'm Mickelle Weber, and today I'm excited to bring you American photographer Darren Smith, who is our 2025-2026 Artist of the Year for House of Peregrine. His most recent work, Mayflies, is what we'll be exploring this year as a community at House of Peregrine. I just happen to have it right here. It's a beautiful, beautiful book full of images of people who are coming together for very short amounts of time that are life-changing and are really special. Think Burning Man or Day of the Dead. These are festivals that people come together and they create new versions of themselves and find belonging, which I think resonates deeply with the experience of being from abroad. So join us this year as we celebrate this work, we go deep with it, and meet Darren. Today, we are talking to him and going deep on his work, his past, and his life as a peregrine. I really hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Darren. I am so glad that you have joined us today. How are you doing? I want to just first point out your beautiful pink headphones that you have gifted us with today. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I really want you to start by introducing yourself and your book, Mayflies.
I'm Darren Smith, and I grew up in a small town in Virginia. And when I turned 19, I decided it would be a great idea to go to university in Australia, just completely on the opposite side of the world.
As one
And
does.
yeah, exactly. And it was through that curiosity and international mindset that when I later moved to Amsterdam, I started just photographing the nightlife here and discovering what I love about the city and the freedom and identity, the ability to be who you want to be, that really inspired me to set out around the world and discover places where people can freely express themselves. And so the place I grew up, yeah, it was also kind of within that satanic panic moment. And
I don't know about the
that,
satanic panic moment.
all right. So that was in the like 80s, early 90s when, the idea of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, these are all gateways to Satanism, and that if you played the record backwards, that was, going to put you down the wrong path, so to speak. So I tried to get away from that as far as possible because it was just a place where in growing up, you really felt that your own identity was somewhat constrained within society's parameters.
Just had a really strict code of conduct where you grew up.
Absolutely. And it wasn't, say, like completely religious based. It was just societal fears around that time of gang violence and drugs in the early 90s in the US. And I think for small towns, that fear was very real.
Hmm.
And I very much didn't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, interesting. So were you like a weird kid that had to kind of, I say weird, like I love weird people, so this is a compliment, but were you like having to kind of tamp down things that you wanted to try or things you wanted to express while you were growing up?
Absolutely. I remember I had blue hair and then I got called into the principal's office and then they were just like, look, we need to have a talk about your attitude. And I'm like, well, what attitude? Well, we see that you're going through some changes right now. Yes, I have blue hair. Um,
And so that was alarming where you grew up to have blue hair.
Yeah, well, that exactly. If that is what is alarming, I really wonder what they think of my book. So
Yeah. I hope that things have changed a bit, but let's talk about your book in a second. I wanted to first, it's mentioned quite prominently, and I think it's a big part of your life, that you were working with Stan Shaffer at the beginning of your career. And so I wonder if you could tell us that story quickly, and then I want to circle back to what brought you to these festivals and photographing these people. But I think it's a big part of your story, maybe. And you mention it quite prominently in the book. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I love talking about Stan because he's no longer with us. And when I was after I went to university in Australia, and I came back to the US just because I kind of thought, well, I'm going to change how everyone thinks and share my international mindset. And well, that didn't go very well, but I ended up in New York assisting for Stan, who's a fashion photographer from the like the 70s, 80s, 90s era. And he was just an absolute inspiration, but he really photographed the times in the sense that you think of glamour and disco and everything that entails in New York society. That's what he was about, and he was working on his own coffee table book. It was like um, a retrospective of his life in some ways, and it ended up being his swan song. So, unfortunately, he passed away the day he submitted the last deadline for the book.
Wow. And you were his assistant and then turned into someone who was caring for his work with his son Justin, who also wrote the intro and a forward to your book. I thought was really lovely.
Yeah, so I've always maintained very close contact with his family, and we were also like similar ages, so it was kind of as they were growing up and becoming their own selves. I was also then like, developing as a adult and professionally as well. So then we always maintained contact after their father passed away, and then I was asked, I think in 2016 to come help them make a show of the state wanted to make a show of his work in San Francisco at Evergold Galleries, and I helped curate and go through the whole technical process with them and the photo editing, like in terms of selection, which photographs that Stan felt were important, and I felt very much like an advocate speaking his mind in some ways because I
You worked so
they're
closely with
over
him.
and there are over 1 million negatives in this collection. So
Wow.
I am possibly the only human on Earth who's seen all of the work, and it made it a very intimate process to go through. And anyone that's uh, went through photographs of a deceased person, you often feel like you're having a conversation with that person, and
Yeah.
that's one of the beautiful things of photography. But then when you multiply that times the amount of work he has and the fact that you want to produce it and share also part of what links that to society and why it's relevant to today,
Yeah.
it becomes a very intense process.
I can only imagine. And yeah, it's such a lovely, people don't know this about me, but I spent 10 years in advertising and have a degree in photography. And so I can really relate to that notion that if someone were to go through the negatives and now it's digital files, right? But I did shoot on film for a long time. That's a really intimate process, but it also being a curator is not always the same skill as being a photographer. And so the fact that you're able to do both and have had the experience of creating something professionally from both points of view is really nice. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to step back from geeking out there. So Justin compared your work to Irving Penn. And when I saw your work, I agreed, but also a little bit, I really saw some of the work of Diane Arbus as well as an influence from my own time. Um, did you start out in portrait photography, or is that something, is that the work you were doing commercially when you were living in Australia?
In Australia, I worked at a commercial firm called Acorn Photo, and they actually specialized in architecture photography. So for a lot of my professional life, I was honing very different skill set in terms of photography, but my passion has always been portraits and people. And so then whenever I came here, I really decided, well, I need to also think more about what I'm excited about and not just what pays the bills,
Right.
and see if I can combine those two aspects a bit more. And that's how it kind of got started. But Irving Penn was absolutely a huge inspiration for the book. He did a similar book back in the late 60s called Worlds in a Small Room, which was about inviting people from all walks of life, but everywhere from Papua New Guinea to San Francisco. And I really felt that I wanted to examine that, but through originality and creativity, and the place to find those now, which I believe to be festivals and cultural gatherings.
Yeah. And so I have this timeline right. You moved to Australia, went to university, moved back, thought you were going to change things, found your work with Stan in New York. I think there's a stopover in Paris there that I'm missing.
Oh yeah. So one day I'm working with Stan, and then he says, "I'm moving to France with my lover." And I thought, okay, well, I'm out of a job. And then it was very quiet, and he's a very extroverted, very person who would say what was on his mind. So I thought that was a bit odd. And then it got to the end of the day, and then he just said, no, that I really wanted to say, like, that's an invitation. I want you to come to France with me and live in a barn, and we are going to finish my photo book. And as I think a 22-year-old, uh, that sounded like a fantastic idea.
Wow. And so that was your second stop in a foreign country. So from the US to Australia, back to the US, repatriating to France to work with Stan, and then back to the US, or where did you go from there?
So then my now wife said, you need to get out of France because this book thing you're doing is taking a very long time. And so she came over and visited, and while I was there, and then she ended up booking me a one-way ticket to Australia and said, right, we're not doing this long distance thing anymore. And that's just how I ended up back in Australia. Also, I really wanted to go, but
Yeah.
and then I ended up started working there professionally, and then we just hung out there until I think 8 years later. Timeline to me is a bit fuzzy, but then in 2016, we almost at the drop of a hat had a recommendation from a friend who said, "Hey, you should check out Amsterdam. Why don't you go to Amsterdam to do your thing?" And 3 days later, we booked one-way tickets to Amsterdam and just said, if it doesn't work out, it could be a very expensive holiday.
Wow. I feel like that's so resonant with my own story. But we came for a year, one-way ticket. And that, had you ever been here before? You'd been in France, but not maybe in Amsterdam? Had you been here before?
No, not at all. And I knew one person, and he wasn't even living here whenever I moved
Oh
over.
my
So it
gosh.
was, he was coming in a couple months later. So it was like, oh, well, I'll get settled and then I'll get some tips. But uh, it was, yeah, so my wife Matilda, she'd already been to Amsterdam once when she was 19. But she said she had seen like the middle of the town from basically where the station is just down to the Bijenkorf area, and just this one street more or less. And then so when she came back, she said, Amsterdam is massive. I don't remember it being so big.
My gosh. So sight unseen, basically you moved here. Kind of like me. I get it. And that impulse I think is a strange and beautiful impulse to just jump off a cliff. And a lot of people in our community have had that experience, but before I moved here, I hadn't met any of them. So I literally felt like a crazy person. And I had 3 toddlers at the time as well. So I didn't feel like an adult, and I didn't feel like a sane person, but I just knew I needed to go. And so that I love that you had a similar experience, maybe without the toddlers, but it was a much bigger move from Australia to Amsterdam. So
I think it was a different move. I don't think you could say bigger or smaller
yeah.
because you have your own challenges with 3 toddlers. I think for us, it was more that we moved with uh, 4 suitcases, or however much you can get on a normal ticket.
Yep.
And we just came into a fully furnished apartment for 6 months. But then we needed to find a place, and that ended up being a shell, the second apartment. And I remember, uh, so Matilda went off to a family reunion while we moved into the other place. And I think for 2 weeks, all that we had in that apartment was a towel and a pillow, I think. I was waiting for IKEA to deliver, but IKEA in the Netherlands in delivery is a bit like, you know,
It's like being in Vegas.
figure, yeah, and figuring out the astrological clock on when they say they can deliver, which is not anytime soon. So I'd been sitting waiting on this delivery that kept being delayed. I'm like, well, one day I'll be sleeping in a little bed.
Yep. We have similar. We came with only suitcases as well. We had 5 of us, so it was a lot of suitcases, but yeah, I get it. And we slept on an air mattress for nearly 6 months. So it is a very funny story. And it wasn't for any other reason besides we needed to figure out how to live here, because there are indeed those things. So when you moved here, you had to figure out maybe, was this a big transition in your creative expression as well? Because you were working for an architectural photography studio, and now you could maybe focus on your passions. What made you go to your first festival and start photographing?
So the first one I went to, just previous to that, I'd done a like a sort of a little project with Lady Galore, who is one of the major drag queens in the Netherlands, and they were doing a 50 drag queen lip sync video. And we made this little project that ended up getting in the Design and Architecture Museum in uh, Rotterdam. And just from that, they asked me, hey, do you want to come to the Milkshake Festival and take more photos? And it just kind of was like, okay, well, I'll just start making some more photos. But again, I was thinking really about just these little individual portrait projects that would boost my portfolio. And it just very quickly turned into, well, that invite turned into another invite. And it grew organically for a long time. And then I very much decided that if I was going to continue it, it needed to be on the world stage and not just Amsterdam.
Yeah, that makes sense. And was that, had you ever been to a festival before, like yourself as like a participant, or was this also you discovering what it's like to be at a festival like this?
I think it was the first time I'd been to festivals, let's say like that, because I went to plenty of places in Australia. My very first gig as a photographer was, and this is all the way back, I think 2006, 2007, that there was like an online magazine of some sort that they wanted photos of all these gigs. And a friend of mine was a journalist, and she said, well, why don't you just sign up and we'll do it together? And so we'd go off and photograph these gigs and just take one photo that they were going to use on the website. And that's how I got through the last year of university with, you know, sort of doing odd jobs like that.
Yeah,
And I got to see a lot of cool festivals there.
that's amazing. So it wasn't your first time. So you kind of knew what to expect a little bit. And so from there, this transformation, so you're taking portraits, what did you start noticing about this? Or maybe you came in with a theory about how these identities form. Because I imagine the process of someone deciding to go to a festival, creating their persona, whether or not it's from scratch or one they use often. Did you already have insight into that process, or was that something new for you?
That was something completely new to me. And it was very much having the collective mass of the body of work that whenever I started joining a couple of projects together and trying to look for a thread,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things I started to notice was how it was so strongly linked to community first, and why is that, and the fact that when you go to a festival, it's something you've been looking forward to all year potentially, and you're there to see your friends, and you might not reconnect with them again for another year. And so I started thinking to myself, that is a great place to photograph people because then they're really very relaxed. It's very personal to them, and they're also very extravagantly presented.
Yeah. It's probably the only place that adults dress up like that. Besides Halloween, maybe in the States. But we should go back and say the book is a book of portraits. So these people are dressed to the nines in costumes, in personas, sometimes provocative, sometimes just really, they look like professionally decorated or, dressed up. They look like they've been to a costumer. But for the most part, they're self-made. Is that right?
For the most part, yes. Uh, there are a few exceptions, but it meant that for me, there was a clear criteria that I needed to draft and think about when I'm curating the places, and that the fashion is either self-made or it's community-based, where people are performing in a trope, so then they have dedicated costume designers. I was very much excluding people that were buying things from a store and you could see it was store-bought. And when I have people that are with me to help me scout, that's one of the things I say to them is, all right, you think that is an amazing costume. I want you to find everyone that you think is amazing and bring them back, but make sure that you walk up to them to have a conversation and really carefully look at the costume and what they have to say, because if it's just something that they bought, it won't have as much meaning and won't be necessarily part of the project.
Yeah. And yeah, it's so telling when someone puts that much work into something that they're going to present as. And so each portrait, and we're going to show some of these in the video if people can see this, or you can see our website. Each portrait really is them presenting their work to you and their persona, whether they're in, or some of them in character, or is it mostly just them presenting this visual representation?
It's both in character and it is themselves, because in order, I think, to go on these journeys, that people also craft into the persona, which is maybe a more authentic version of themselves, or they also want to enter a fantasy, which is usually, in theme of whatever the event is that they want to embrace. But there's also a third element, which is a cultural element, which some of the places I've been to, for example, carnivals, that people are just being characters that is in part a parody of things going on, or it represents even like a pagan ritual that they belong to a culture that this is what they follow, but it is a community based in that.
Yeah. There's a few in there that are, pretty recognizable, but a few that aren't. So there's like someone dressed up as the devil, which is a controversial subject, right? And then there's others that are, you can see there's a woman with feathers that has feathers in her hair and a skull, I believe, like a skull of an animal. And so you can see these themes being played with, or maybe they're representing, or maybe they're provoking something. So there are several references to like religious or pagan things. And then there's the ones that are just, they've made this character up from a combination of references or their own imagination. And say Burning Man is one you've been to. It's kind of a celebration of the individual. Be yourself, off. We're out of society for these days. Do you find that is when people's best character comes out, or do you think that this is just them expressing something that is latent inside?
I think that it is always going to be a combination of those things, because it really exists on a spectrum uh, for anyone of like why they're there. And I've interviewed a lot of people to ask them this question, and it's so personal and case by case. But within that, in defining like what it is that I'm exploring, radical self-expression, which is from one of the principles from Burning Man, is certainly one that has come up and helped define what it is, and that very much that this is the most unfiltered version of who you are or who you want to present.
So taking off a filter is a big theme, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And when I was growing up, the funny thing about Burning Man is I grew up in Salt Lake City, and a lot of people went to Burning Man, but no one talked about going to Burning Man. And so that has changed radically since I was a kid or a teenager, into going to Burning Man being a part of your entire personality. And so for a place like the US, or maybe it's just my perception, it's less, it's more accepted in a lot of circles to go to these festivals now. And again, maybe that's just my worldview and it's always been that way. Do you think that we, and maybe you can speak to where you're from too, do you think we're accepting that there's multiple versions of ourselves because these festivals have become more prominent or more plentiful, or maybe more like yourself, people are bringing it out, bringing the images out? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's been going on for hundreds of years because there are plenty of other festivals like Carnival, which dates at least 400 years. But I mean,
Wow.
you can, without going a lot into the history of Carnival and then other pagan celebrations and mystery plays and different things that I think uh, it has been going on, but that it's very much that, and maybe it's not true, which is that Burning Man isn't the Studio 54 of our era. But I think because of that, say, idea, that we can look to that as a North Star of culture and what's going on, and then say, well, because of that, these things are happening, and maybe it was just that it had to be something for our generation, and this is what it was, and then it's reflected in other things. And I think it certainly helped, though, that through Burning Man and through other, uh, say, cultural zeitgests that have happened in the last 15 years, that it's certainly become more widely accepted. But I can't think of any other festival that has as many naked people as Burning Man. So
As many, how many, what kind of people?
naked people.
Naked people. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that, when it first started, there was no social media. And so I think that also helped. But what I wanted to ask you is there has there ever been any resistance to you photographing these or publishing the photos by the people that run the festivals?
No, because step one is ensuring that there will be no resistance by inviting them as a collaborator to, uh, first of all, I really need to be very close to where the action is so that the people don't have that far to walk and it's, I like for them, it's easy. And then I also need things like electricity, but then it also means that whenever it came to promoting the book and I crowdfunded it, so then I was able to go back to those venues and say, dear collaborator, it's now ready to go into book form. Would you please put me on your newsletter or whatever you want to do? But this is my intention. And everyone was extremely supportive.
That's amazing. So collaboration seems to be a really big part of how you approach this. And so it feels like you're collaborating with not only the individual and the community that comes together, but with this idea of the overall arching idea that people come together and have these gatherings that are by definition temporary and by definition outlandish in some way. And so my question for you is that, in coming up with the name Mayflies, how did that bring all of your ideas together?
In the beginning, I had called this book Overnight Tribes, and it didn't feel like it stuck because a tribe is very much something that you need to belong to, and it's very much well, a bit religious, and that you're either in the tribe or you're not. And in the 90s, this was, of course, a big thing of find your tribe, and you were a goth or a hacker or well, I guess like a slacker, like all these things, all these labels.
Yeah.
And I really found that didn't work for this project, that it was the opposite of labels. And then I still needed a name for the book. And I found this definition of mayflies that uh, they come out once a year and they dance across every available surface and then they go away and come back again. And the people I photograph live to celebrate one day a year. I mean, sometimes it is longer, but the fact that they were just dancing across every available surface really seemed to define where I was because I often felt like there was no space for a photo shoot. And mayflies are an interesting winged insect because of their lifespan, but also because uh, in a lot of people's heads, they have like a dragonfly when you're thinking of a mayfly. They're like, oh, it's like kind of purple wings, but actually a mayfly is a bit unique, but it's also like a little bit annoying that all the places I saw that have mayfly swarms, they're like literally everywhere, and they're just living this glorious life for one day. And that was a starting point on, as the book was developing, on deciding, well, is this a mayfly place? Is this a place where people are really living the life?
Yeah. And that looks different from festival to festival, but they are living intentionally on purpose for one day, coming together. In the case of Burning Man, it's in terrible weather. In other festivals, maybe it's against cultural norms, but against all odds, they're coming together, and living to the fullest they can. And when you were coming up with this name, do you feel like there's part of you that was exploring that as well as an artist, because you were kind of constrained growing up in Australia? You weren't from Australia and you were working in architecture, which is not your favorite medium, maybe, or your favorite thing to photograph. So was this a way of you exploring as an artist as well?
100%. And I think the whole process is also for me about letting go as an artist and just accepting what is, because as you're trained, especially in commercial photography, uh, where people are like looking to weed out imperfections because, it needs to be a perfect, polished image.
Yeah.
And I then letting go and then saying, hey, if there are creases in the background, that's just part of it because it turns out that it was very windy that day. And I'm not going to pretend that it is perfect. I did try to find this balance, and then I think in letting go, I was able to actually have a few things that remain behind. So in a couple of photos, you might see leaves on the ground, or in almost every photo, you will see a wristband. If there was a wristband, I didn't retouch it out, and that's the wristband from the event. And most of them aren't very nice; they're just pieces of plastic that I left there intentionally so that you knew that it was from an event.
And that must have been really hard. So we're seeing a lot of restraint when we see these things, I have a feeling.
Restraint and curation, because I photographed over 1,000 people,
Wow.
and in just a bookmaking process, that's just part of what happens is you need to, I think of it like the rain. First, evaporate a whole bunch of things into a giant cloud, and the cloud of pictures is just around. And when do you have enough to make a book? Whenever it just starts raining one day, because it's just the right conditions. And to get the right conditions, you need also the right team and to explore the right themes. But I think then whenever you start the actual laying out the book and that side of it, then actually the pairings and the things, the strengths of the project naturally congeal together, and you already know which photos are powerful pictures, but then you have to link those moments up. You need to find things that are unique, and that in a photo book also, that there's no beginning or an end often. You just need to be able to pick it up and open it and go on a different journey, hopefully every time, because I hope you don't pick it up and it just lands in the same picture. That
Yep.
then you can go backwards or forwards. And I think all of this is through this whole process of collecting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the process of making a book is a rigorous and interesting, and it's really hard to go through these things, and pick your favorites, or pick the ones that maybe aren't your favorites, but that work as a book. Um, were there images in the book that you absolutely had to have?
Absolutely. Uh, yeah, it. I think though, as I went on, there were pictures that I felt strongly about, but then I had an editor who very much had a very great collaborator. So he would put forward ideas and say, "Well, what do you think about this?" And I'd say, "Oh, well, that's not my favorite idea, but I am not really the type of person I like to say no." So I would just let it sit, and I would realize by letting it sit that there was so much strength to what he brought to that, and then realizing that some pictures that I felt strongly about were actually my own personal connection to that moment, and that isn't what makes a strong picture sometimes, that you have to kind of separate that out. But they're definitely favorite photographs, and they ended up in the book.
Want to tell us which ones they were? What's two that you wouldn't let go of?
So one of them is a picture of a fire performer I photographed at Wasteland Party, which is a BDSM festival in Amsterdam. And it was the first time I went to a party. I was backstage, and it was her first time there as a fire performer, but she just had surgery the few days before. So I didn't know this until after the fact, because later she told me we're still in contact. And she shared with me that she had surgery a few days before. So her entire performance, she was in agony. And then they say, go to this photographer who's backstage. And she just has this like look of vulnerability and different things that I can now see. And I've always seen the vulnerability, but now I know why. And I feel like that's a special moment because for both of us, it was our first time there. And we have since gone on creative journeys. And that's one. And then another is a photo of a little girl that I photographed in northern Macedonia at a pagan carnival called Verchani. And it's an 800-year-old carnival where people come together for pagan New Year. But she's actually dressed as a Disney character, Maleficent, or how you pronounce that. But and she just has this wisdom beyond her years. She just looks like a fully grown adult in some ways, but she's, I think, about 7 years old. But I feel she's very wise, and she was one of my translators while I was there. It was this 7-year-old girl speaking to everyone in Macedonian and then in English for me. But I took a photo because she was the daughter of the organizer. And, that was very much a gift to say thank you for all the help. And I very quickly, as soon as she got in front of the camera, I thought, this is a serious picture.
Yeah. I love what you said about, is this a great, strong image, or am I in love with the moment? That must be hard to separate. And probably part of the process of making this book was, and letting it out into the wild, is that, right? That you're letting other people create their own moments with these images. And so it sounds like your collaboration was a good first step to do that.
It really was. And I believe that it's important for any type of collaboration to put your audience in the front in the way that I believe first that I'm the person who's there to showcase other people's creativity. And I find it hard to get in front of the camera and talk to people, but I do, because their courage and their belief in themselves gives me some belief in that of what I'm doing, and that I want to share it. But also, I think you have to think about how to best get that message across. And that's where I think that then I can really separate it, is to say that, like, this is not just a book about Darren. This is a book about creative people and originality, and that these are really important messages. And if I put that in the front, then it's much easier to separate.
Yeah. And we didn't go over your process, but you and I, when we were speaking earlier, did. So maybe you can share it with everybody. This moment when people step in front of your camera and kind of transform. Tell us how this happens over and over again. It's kind of like the magic. And I'd love for you to give us some insight into that.
So to give you a little bit of perspective and paint the picture is, my studio exists anywhere where there is an event, and this could be a sidewalk where there's a carnival happening and a parade, and I'm just there with this photo studio and lights. It could be backstage in a nightclub, or it could be at Burning Man, suspended off of an art car. And I'm there, and I've collaborated with the organizers to find what we think is the best place that I can exist. And I come with a few friends who are voluntold what to do. And we embark on this adventure, which is just, we don't really announce it anywhere, that it just happens naturally. We're just there with a photography background, and we invite people to collaborate in an art project. And if I'm asking you to help me find people, I just say, you don't need to explain anything. Just wait until they're walking with you. Just say, you look amazing, follow me. And that's all you need to say. And then whenever they get to the art project, then it's an experiential thing where they're suddenly like, wow, this is here. And we have an interaction individually. I try to give people as long as I can, both in the physical aspect that how long do I photograph for? It could be 5 hours, it could be 2 hours, could be 10 hours, depends on what the parameters are of the event. And we just photograph until we get tired. And then at some point, the party gets a little out of control, and that's pretty much when we decide when we're going to leave. But it's just this whole kind of thing that
So,
we do.
yeah. So this is an atmosphere where you can say to someone, "You look amazing. Follow me."
Yeah, well, you really want to at least have them hear you and say that, but it's quite often that I'm even in places that are so like loud and chaotic that it's like you tap them on the shoulder and they're like, "What? Dancing?" And you're like, "Okay, like there." And then I've had to approach some people a few times to get
Yeah.
them to then go, "Let's go have a cigarette. All right, now this is what I want to say to you." And then they're like, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, let's go."
That's amazing. And when they come in front of the camera, that's a different kind of moment. If you've just been in loud music, not maybe even in your own universe, not even caring if you're seen, and then you go to being hyper focused on, that's a real moment, I think, that you're creating there.
I hope so. I mean, the idea of coming with the background is by removing all the context of where they are, because you already see and you think of the photos of all festivals and it's glorious and it's sunlit and people laughing, and but if you take all of that away and just focus on what is so great and all the details within someone, like their expression, but also of course what they're wearing,
Yeah.
and then that becomes front and center, and the story and my connection to them, which is just about having a moment and photographing them in this moment where they're at their most comfortable, and sometimes they're not that comfortable in front of the camera, but then it's just a process of taking a lot of photos sometimes, or sometimes first we just hang out a bit and chat, and other people who are there, like also I don't have a line. There's no like photo booth aspect to it, or I try to prevent that. So if suddenly there are a line of people, I have to say, I'm sorry, this is an art project. It's not a photo booth.
Yeah.
You can't pay for this. You can't line up either, really. So just come back in a little while, and we'll try to remember who we saw before in case, that way we can prioritize you. But I
Yeah.
really try to stress that it's about the person who's there, and having a moment together.
Yeah. What do you think the effect is on someone when they're chosen and then photographed like that and then put into a book or to a collection? That's a really alchemical process, in my opinion. But what do you think the effect is on that person?
Well, I think that I don't know. That's a complicated one, just by the
It's
fact
like
that
probably 10 questions, honestly. So answer however
yeah.
you see fit. But I also think then it has an effect on the audience as well. So I think this loop that you're creating of the way you're approaching it, which is like selecting someone, bringing them in, talking to them, that makes a big difference in the effect it has also on the audience.
Well, I think because it's always to say, hey, we're participating in an art project, and you'll get a copy of the photo, and I'm making this book. But explaining that all at once is sometimes incoherent, and I've often tried to communicate that. So it's been really having different points of contact where I touch base with them to say, hey, we're photographing you. It's about this thing. And then when they receive the photos, I send out like a community email to everyone that participated to say, thank you so much. You'll hear from me again in this later point, so that at least it's a conversation that continues, and that people then add me on Instagram and we continue
Yeah.
talking, because this is how I get recommendations as well, is that people say, hey, have you heard of this event? Here's some photos. And then I go, oh my God, this is amazing. How do I go? Uh,
Yeah.
and it just becomes that they become then collaborators in some way. But I've often and I still try to find new ways to make sure that I engage with people, so that my intentions are really clear, or that like, hey, I want to create art out of this, and that you are the art to some degree, but also it is this whole process, and it's about showing this, that I I want them to be able to see themselves how I see them. And then I also want them to see each other so that then they see, say, someone from Day of Dead in Mexico looks at some like European festival and they go, wow, like we are like one and the same. And that is my goal of this whole collaborative process.
Yeah. So it's almost like a thread that runs around the entire world, and people who have this, I don't, would you call it an impulse or this gift? I mean, you can see it in many ways, this offering, this impulse, this exchange of going to these festivals, dressing up, creating these personas or showing these personas or these sides of themselves, being in front of a camera. That's the next step, because sometimes these events aren't photographed. They're completely, mostly anonymous. But do you think there's some magic in them actually being willing to share this with your project?
Yes, I believe that they are the magic. And I I try to go to extraordinary lengths also just to match their intensity and the level of like all the backgrounds are hand painted. And I think that I can only amplify like their awesomeness, and that's very much how the process like is informed is that I need to capture that magic.
That's a beautiful thing you've just said. I think I try to match their intensity. I love that, because I think, for me at least, what I see in these portraits is that they are, and in a way, you're trying to catch a mayfly in a jar, right? You're actually catching them, presenting them. It's probably never going to happen again. It may never happen this way again, and that's a really beautiful idea. But then B, sharing it with others, creating community around it, showing that there's more people around the world like this. It makes the world seem a little more friendly.
I think that that's necessary in the times that we live in to not only feel connected, but to understand that there's this uh, desire as well as that like these places exist, but there's also this impulse to just for humans to come together and celebrate together. And when that happens, naturally they also are creative. And it comes out even if you think of like a toddler's birthday party that then someone puts on a silly hat and runs around
Yeah.
and that it's important, I think, for us to recognize that this is part of humanity is to celebrate and to create.
When I first saw your book, I imagined, for some reason, someone who has always wanted to go to a festival but never had the courage, that they get to actually experience what it might be like to have their desires reflected in these portraits, because it's not a large amount of people that go to these are do these sorts of things. And so I really, for some reason, had this image of someone who maybe grew up like you or I, that sees your book and maybe either moves to another place because they feel isolated and they figure out there's these people like them, or they're able to feel a little more at home in their weirdness. And so I think for me, that's what that evoked, is this opportunity to be able to see something you wouldn't otherwise be able to see or participate in.
I think that there's definitely that cabinet of curiosities, and that you don't have to want to go to these places to experience the photographs and enjoy them. And
Yeah.
that I certainly hope that it does evoke curiosity, that maybe it's something that you think, all right, well, maybe I should check that out or something similar, that then you have now just another point of reference and another reason why you should.
Yep.
I think also, I think that that is like beneath the surface in terms of what you could read into it, because I think if I say that's my mission, then it kind of takes away the power of that. That
Yep.
I think that it's part of the art, and it's definitely one thing that I want to inspire, but I have to be very restrained and to say that this is what I expect.
Yeah, of course. And the other thing I wanted to say about the work is that when I flipped through without reading any of the titles, as just a first visual read, and I went deep because I was trying to select some photos that we would use for House of Peregrine. But when I went through it, I was very surprised that a few of these were a BDSM festival. I know that sounds funny, but the provocative nature of what they're wearing is not what comes through first is their humanity. And that I think is neither good or bad, but it was surprising to me that I couldn't tell what the festival was or what it was about by what they're wearing.
That is deliberate and on my part, which is that if you think of BDSM festivals and pictures, they tend to be hypersexualized,
Yeah.
and I I I just wanted to take away from that element and just also to say that because a lot of the times they are like dressed in thousands, like the outfits are worth thousands of dollars, and as soon as you really focus on that, that then also you're in a fashion element, and so I very much saw that the humanity and just that they like love being here and that people come from all walks of life to do any of these events.
Yep.
So the reality is that some people might be, I don't know, like a real estate agent or an accountant, and they're still at all of these different events, and that is immaterial because at one stage I was actually collecting like information and interviewing the people I photographed that were going to be in the book. I tried to just go, well, what is the line? And, is this interesting? And in the end, I decided to exclude all of that information and just leave it as the photographs with the byline of where it is, because the only thing that matters is that you see their humanity and you see the connection that they have in that moment that we share. And the rest, there's of course a bit more text in the back, but the rest is for you to construct your own narrative and decide yourself what you find interesting and to look into.
Yeah. That definitely comes through. So bravo. But I was struck by that because I think the images speak for themselves in they're provocative because not because of what the person's wearing, but because of the level of vulnerability that has been expressed through human contact. And that's any great portrait photographer. I'm also a very yeah, I'm a geek and a connoisseur of portraits. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you was about your intention, like how this all weaves together as part of your experience as a foreigner now for most of your adult life. How do you see that weaving into this work?
I, I think that that starts with having an international mindset and just the way that I went from a very small town in Virginia to Australia. And I went to Perth, which is a city of 2 million people. So suddenly, and that's not a very big city, but still to me, that felt like an infinitely large city where I was then in a student village hanging out with international people. And that investment alone has been a free Airbnb for different couches around the world now. And part of this project, in fact,
Yeah.
is visiting some of those people. But I think all of that really began whenever I started as an international student, and then you just can't unturn that page.
Which is why I'm always trying to find them for international life, because you don't outgrow the place. Nobody understands your experience when you go back. And so that's why we use Peregrine, because Peregrines can live on any continent of the world, but it means outsider.
I think that, I mean, as you said, that like you can't compare your experience and you can't go back. And I think that that's absolutely what I realized through my experiences. That
Did that make you feel lonely when you moved back?
I think so. I think that I didn't realize it made me feel lonely because I I just had this desire to continue to learn and to grow, and I wasn't finding that same uh,
Level of
stimulation.
intensity? People were not meeting you in your level of intensity?
Well, maybe it's intensity, maybe it's just curiosity because I really just love talking and having conversations with people that have completely different backgrounds and learning something new from that. And I think that the US is a place that's so big that you can just continue to do your own thing,
Yeah.
and that you have an experience which is that you think that uh, everything in your surrounding is just how things are,
Mm.
and the rest of the world. it turns out operates in a completely different way. There are kilometers, and then there are miles, and then there's Fahrenheit and Celsius, and that is just, it continues.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good insight, is that if your bubble is so big, you think that's the whole world.
Yeah. And I feel like whenever you see another bubble, then you suddenly are just looking at it from another point of view. It's just that you can't go back into the old one because you yourself have changed, and people change and grow at a different rate. And I see it with my friends back home and my family, that they have their own lives and their own experiences, and the experiences that you get whenever you're overseas, you just grow exponentially. It all just happens very quickly.
Yeah. It's like you're expanding in all directions at once.
Yeah. And you're having to adapt to a whole other culture and rule set, everything, and then you find what works with you, and from that as well. And I feel like it's very much, you have the luxury to pick up from different cultures at that point of which rules you want to follow and what you believe, because you suddenly see that there are different value systems, and it's hard
I
to
always
compare
say
the
that,
Netherlands.
yeah, I always say there's a cult in every culture. And then you see the cult you're from, and then you just start making your own religion.
I think that that's exactly how it goes, is that you have to constantly, uh, I think, search within yourself in the beginning, especially to really go like, am I crazy? Like people do this, and then you have to get a lot of detective skills and really uh, understand people's motives and their way of operating, and then realize that you were the person that they are probably thinking, oh, they're acting a bit strange.
Yeah.
And uh, yeah,
Yeah. And I think that in a way it makes you, like you said, a detective. And so you're always observing. It makes you live life a different way and from a different perspective. And now the effect it's had on me is I never actually hold an opinion very strongly. I never did before, but now it's worse. So nothing is sacred now. I hold very things sacred. But I think and hope in a good way. But creating a life from scratch, or a worldview or a perspective, is a very interesting process, one that you have to actually be ready for, I think. The last thing I wanted to ask you about is, you have a daughter, and she's being raised now in the Netherlands. Is that right? Was she born here?
yeah. So she was born just after the tail end of COVID, so that was one of our concerns when looking at having kids. So then, as soon as it felt like it was possible for us, we uh, had Thea, and she's 3 years old. She is Dutch, American, and Australian, and it's really great to see that language acquisition from like someone who's then learning two languages, because she gets full-time Dutch at daycare. We also speak a bit of Dutch to her, which you're told you're not supposed to do really, because it can confuse people with different accents, and also if your grammar isn't perfect. But uh, my wife is also a linguist, so she's very tuned in on like the language learning process.
Yeah. And for me, at least, and maybe it's the same for you, I feel kind of happy that, I mean, that nowhere is perfect, but if you went to school with blue hair in the Netherlands, people would barely even look at you like that's a problem. Do you find that comforting, that she's growing up somewhere where she can be a little bit more self-expressed, perhaps?
I think in all avenues, I feel more comfortable that she's growing up here. And I mean, first, there are no guns in schools like you have in the US. That's like one thing that I forget about, even that I have to be so grateful for every time I read the news. But I think for me, it's also just the fact that sex education is just part of education here. It starts actually in kindergarten, and that she has maybe a more healthy attitude towards sexuality, and respecting other people's boundaries, and other aspects of being an adult that I think a lot of us get when we're like teenagers. That
Mhm.
is just part of the education system here.
Yeah. And what about your partner? She grew up in Australia?
Yes, she's from Perth, and
Perth. Okay.
I had lived there almost her whole life. It was only through traveling that we had left. She lived for a little while in France as an au pair, and when we moved here, it was her first big time moving abroad. But we had differing points of view in the beginning that she thought that, well, we could do it for a year, and if it didn't work out, then it would just be going back to Australia. But I very much thought, well, there's a lot of confirmation bias out in our world, and that after a year, people would go, oh, well, that's about what they expected. So I was determined to just make it stick for a little while longer at least, and but also to reassess, to constantly say, like, I mean, I think we did say, all right, after 6 months, we were going to make sure that we didn't hate it. After a year, and then it became I think from that we said, okay, year 2, let's not check in about it. Let's go to year 3. And then at year 5, but by that time we had already bought an apartment and really felt settled. But it was more that double confirmation to go, okay, now that we went through the incredibly complicated house buying process here, how do we feel about that?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's important because especially when you're both my partner and me as well, we're neither of us are from here. So it really is that decision to stay in a place over and over again. It's like recommitting to a long-term partnership, recommitting to a place over and over again.
I 100% agree with that sentiment because I also think that I constantly go to other places and go, could I live here? And Amsterdam is the only place that I've ever left. And when I'm not just on holidays, but like away for a job, that I think I really miss being there. I miss the convenience and the people and a lot of things. I don't ever miss the weather, but you can't have everything.
You can't have everything. Yeah, there's compromises no matter what kind of relationship you're in, but hopefully you're making the right ones. And having that love affair with the place and a long-term commitment, for me at least, it's been strange that I don't have any roots here, but that it just suits my values, suits the way I want to live. And of course, that's a luxury in life, but I think that it's also part of a journey that's really important. At least it has been for my family, for generational healing, for a lot of different things. And so I love that that process mirrors a little bit. I think maybe the process some of these people going to these festivals go to, where they're expressing something, having it be seen, having it be validated, have it be on display, having a portrait of themselves as this. That process is really, I mean, fun, but also healing for others, for themselves. Could be that it's cathartic, but also they're healing a lot of things or expressing a lot of things, which I think is a really beautiful part of being human.
I think that that's why I did my venture, and you summarized everything beautifully. I,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the resonance I see between your project and House of Peregrine and what I'm trying to do. And so it's really just really fun to meet a fellow traveler who sees the world similarly. And so I'm happy that we get to interact with your work a little bit deeper this year.
I'm very happy about that. And also for me, it's another experience connecting with people who, let's say, like-minded and that they've traveled to another place and they're experiencing it. It doesn't matter for how long because nothing is for forever. And so in the check-ins that we're talking about, that's certainly one thing that is discussed in my family is like, hey, we still love it, but nothing is for forever. So let's
Yeah.
just enjoy the time we have together and connect with people as many as we can on a deeper level, hopefully. And then when one day we just decide to go somewhere else, that's also fine.
Yeah. The sense of impermanence really is on full display when you live abroad. And lesser degree when you're at a festival because it's only for one day or 5 days or however long, but there is this impending sense of impermanence that is actually part of everyday life of living in a different country. Even if you live there till the day you die, I think that impermanence, that awareness of impermanence is part of the gig. And so I think that's it's something I love bringing people together around.
I think that yeah, it's a great thing to have a community around because as soon as that you see this idea that where you live doesn't have to be where you always are going to live,
Yeah.
it's a paradigm shift. And I just through other conversations, I feel like every time I meet someone and start talking about this, is that then they have another experience in another country that it just rings true, but in a very different way. I just came back from a holiday in Singapore, and I, of course, talked to a couple of people who lived there as, I guess you could say, expats, which I don't know. The term never connects with me. I think maybe I'm an immigrant, or I often say citizen of the world because I've moved now a few times.
Darren, you're a
And
peregrine. Just own it. Peregrine.
all right, I'm a
You're
peregrine.
No, but that's why we use peregrine, because expat never worked for me. Immigrant, I didn't know if I was here forever or if I was staying for very long. I just knew I needed to be where I needed to be during a certain time. And that impulse is, I think, potentially, this is my theory, innate. And so some people have it and some people don't.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with either. And
Nope.
I
I'm so jealous, actually, of people who have the ability to stay in one place their whole life.
I am, but I think at least the one thing that, in terms of my own life, that I want to look back and then say that guy, he just got everything out of everything that he could. He just milked it all. He just was
Yep.
on all the places that were really great and just saw so many things. And going back to Stan's work, this is one of the things that really always hits home whenever I see his work and I'm a part of that collection, is to see someone's life unfold in that way. You really realize the impermanence of like where we are in time, and that there are also people that see time a different way. And that's why I think impermanence really works for me. Is
Yeah. I think that's a really good place to wrap up. I'm really excited to bring people your work and actually give them the chance to meet you, to interact with your work, to buy your book. We'll have an event coming up where people can meet you and ask all the questions they want. For now, if people can't see you in person, where can they find out more about your work? Where can they follow you? All these sorts of things.
so my Instagram is Mayflies Book, and that's also my website, mayfliesbook.com. That has a bit more about my creative journey, and well, of course, you can see photos there too.
Perfect. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we will have the book in the House of Peregrine marketplace later this year. And you'll be able to follow along with our journey of what we're doing with Mayflies this year at houseofperegrine.com. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and please follow along at houseofperegrine.com or follow us on all of the social media handles at houseofperegrine.com podcast. I am super grateful for Darren and all of you for joining me, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed our show. For the latest insights on living internationally, join us at houseofperegrine.com to find out how you can connect with our community. Let's craft our life story with intention together.